we understand the importance of data, but now getting the benefits of all this data that we've stored, where do we start? How do we get that first step? Well, we start by first assessing our organization's ability to take advantage of that data. Do we read data? Do we work with data? Do we analyze data? Are we capable of communicating what we want to do through data? So that's what you're trying to get at. You're trying to answer that data literacy question up front. Where is our company at? We've invested this time into storing data. And where do we start? Well, where we start is we have to know exactly how data will be used within the organization. And to do that, we need to understand, as an organization, can we read data? Do we understand what it's telling us? And then if we can read it, can we work with it? Do we believe what we see when we run analytics and get reports? And then when we don't know something and we're challenged by it, do we know how to analyze it to find the answer? And if all that is in place, then do we communicate those answers with data, or are we still falling back on our beliefs, what we feel in our gut, how we believe the business should run? Or are we much more data centered in our operations and we're using data to drive everything we do? So that's where, when you're talking to an organization, where do they begin? They begin with a self-assessment of themselves, seeing where they're at. Now, a lot of organizations don't start there. Where they start is with a technology, with a tool. They're looking for that silver bullet. And if they're honest, they know that the technology is not a silver bullet, but they're trying to find a technology that fits into their culture without understanding their culture to begin with. Because if the culture is not ready to be data-driven, any tool that you go after is not going to change that. It's going to stall. It will have interim success because you've probably engaged external resources that do have an understanding of how data is supposed to work within the organization. But then that continued success with your data is limited by the fact that what you've done is you've introduced the technology into a culture where the technology is data-driven, but the culture is process-driven. Therefore, the two are at odds. Even though you have looked at technologies in the past, you really want to take a step back and look at where are you from the data perspective and how literate is your organization when it comes to the utilization of data. Having answered that question, then you can begin to ask the next question is, what do I want out of my data? Am I looking for my data to drive certain aspects of my business? Am I looking at my data to help me understand what drives my business? So that then creates all the different channels by which data can be helpful. Once we understand the channels, we can then begin to move down into developing analytics that help us get a handle on that aspect of our business. So if we're looking at FP&A, that's a channel. If we're looking at S&OP, that's another channel. If we're looking at customer satisfaction, yet another channel. We have all these channels of learning and information that we need to not only digest, but gain insight from. And by gaining that insight, we can then take action. And that's our end result. From analysis, you want to build an environment, build a culture in which, out of analytics, out of that insight, you're taking action. And with that action, you are now moving your organization forward, because that action is not descriptive, not telling you what has happened in the past. is not diagnostic, telling you what's wrong with today, but is actually more predictive and prescriptive as to what you need to do to be successful in the future. So that needs to be the emphasis whenever talking to anyone about digital transformation and automation of your organization.
You mentioned the FP&A reports as one channel for the data. So if an organization is struggling to get reports done in a timely fashion, or they want to just speed up that process and have more accurate reports available to them, once you understand a little bit more about your data, is that a good place to focus as the first implementation or the first project that you would want to focus on with your data?
It's a good question, but one of the cautions I would have about starting with reports is reports are what I would say are two-dimensional. They have a certain deliverable to them that you're looking for when you're looking at a balance sheet, when you're looking at your P&L statement. These are statements of a defined result. When you do that, you can, yes, build these and generate the type of report you want. However, the question becomes now, I've built this and I have a question. And to answer that question, I need a different report. I need to structure something differently. Well, if you haven't done your upfront work and created an environment where you can get that data from and pull that information, you're going to again spend time pulling the data together, putting it in the right format, transforming it to where you want, and then generating the report. Doing that over and over and over again, as ad hoc as that may seem, can be quite expensive because you're investing a significant amount of money in the same process over and over again. Data acquisition, data engineering, data reporting. So when you create that repetitive environment, you also create a repetitive cost. Now, a different approach to this is invest in creating a data structure that is geared towards analyzing your data, not reporting on it, and allows you to have multiple perspectives, or in other words, letting you see multiple dimensions into your data, such as time, such as location, such as product type, customer type. By having these various dimensions, you can then look at the measures that they can apply to, and you can have different perspectives. So not only can I have a financial perspective, but I can also have a sales perspective using that same data. Well, what does that do for you? Well, that eliminates the redundancy or the recursion of data acquisition and data structure. So by taking that off the table and now just moving you into that querying of that information so that you can analyze that data and gain insight from that, that gives you a lot more flexibility and lowers your cost. Go one step further and don't make it a report, but make it a dashboard or a visualization of data. And now you have an endless number of reports that you can get at based on the way that you've structured this information and can pull it together, analytic by analytic object, thus giving you a much more well-defined picture. And the benefit of all this is you're creating that single source of truth from which everyone operates, and you're taking out the perception that gets built into each report as different people build the reports. So taking a step back, when you talk reporting, you need to think that it's a two-dimensional publication of a single perception. When you talk analytics, it's essentially a corporate-wide single source of information by which people can gain multiple perspectives and generate as many reports as they need automatically from that core data.
You had mentioned in a customer meeting this morning, one of the ways a client can structure their data is in such a way that it's not tied to a tool, but a tool is just a window into the data. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail?
Right. So a lot of these tools are, whether they're web or cloud-based, they like to use in-memory capabilities. And lots of times to effectively take advantage of that in-memory, they'll create their own cubes, their own structures, so that it works a lot faster. Well, populating those structures, they will bring information in from databases, from comma delimited files, from Excel, from a whole host of sources. Well, if you added a step in between that, if you created a data lake using data management technology available to you, that data lake can essentially constantly maintain your atomic view of your data, give you the ability to have a transformation layer and set the rules by which you transform your data, and then generate views by which these analytic tools can constantly go again. So you pull out one analytic tool, you put another analytic tool in, it looks at the customer view. The customer view remains constant. The only difference is now when that is uploaded in tool A, it used the structure in tool A to essentially make that tool more efficient. In tool B, it uses the structure in tool B that makes that tool much more efficient. So by creating this data lake, we're essentially establishing a repository of information that can essentially withstand the test of time and be available through a wide variety of technologies. And what's fascinating is, had you started with this 15 years ago, the data management technology is still in place that you could use today 15 years ago. What has changed are the visualization tools and the analytic tools on the back end, as they've become a lot more efficient, a lot more functional, a lot more self-managed, so that you can take better advantage and have more citizen analysts, as opposed to having specialized IT people like you did 15 years ago.
If you were to summarize all of this then, and walking a client through from stage one to generated reports or a dashboard in a tool, can you just quickly summarize what that looks like then? What are the stages to that?
First stage is a self-assessment. Where are you at in regards to your understanding of your data? It's what we call data literacy. Right behind that is the second stage, and that's identifying the stewards of your data. Who are the people that are actually going to give the data credibility and make sure that the rest of the organization says, yes, there are people that audit and maintain our data and are stewards of that data, so we can trust it. So I've equipped knowledge. I've given people the knowledge, the literacy to understand our data. And now I've given them the confidence that when they use that data, it will be correct. Once I'm there, then I begin the path of doing analysis. I start by my data acquisition. How can I access the information I want? What information is available to me? Is it internal? Is it external? If it's external, do I have to purchase it? If it's internal, do I have the permissions to access it? Getting that all understood, that now gives you this essentially warehouse of data that you have available to you. Now, I want to pull that data and I want to put it in a repository, my data lake. And I do that by essentially taking that information and capturing it, transforming it, and setting it up into various business views around the questions I have about my business. I have questions about customers. I have questions about finance. So I've now created this repository of views that now can be used by the organization. Next stage is I now want to bring it down to where it can be effective at the departmental level. So I want to create visualizations, these dashboards that people can get into. Now, whether your organization is up to speed on using the most up-to-date dashboards that are out there, or whether you just want to use Excel and be able to download and build your own spreadsheets. Irregardless, what you want to be able to do is equip your end users with these visualizations and data that has been validated and they trust and they're going to use. And you also want it so everybody can access it. This will create transparency within the organization, thus further endearing the trust of the data to the rest of the organization. From there, those analytics allow you to now ask the what if questions and begin to look at your future path. And you can begin to apply statistical methods to the data so that you can see, what am I going to be doing in the future? Where am I most likely to be successful? And then that gets you down that path of having value derived from your data. So when we look at this whole process, we go and we say, it's really an ecosystem that feeds on itself. And it starts with the literacy or educating our employees on data and its value, all the way to then enabling them to ask questions of that data so they can gain insights and improve their contributions to the organization. So you're creating this whole entire ecosystem that builds upon itself and will continually perpetuate the organization. And that continuation, that continual preparation allows you to essentially start with something small, something digestible. You do not have to boil the ocean on day one. You can start with a simple what if question, build the ecosystem around that, and then you can add layer upon layer upon layer to that ecosystem until it fully represents your organization.
What is the value of, we've got this data, we've got, all of the data sources coming into a data lake. We have a structure around that. We're now going to pull, or as a window into that data, we're now going to use a tool like Jedox or Click or some other sort of tool to pull that data. What is the value of those tools as it relates to the data?
These tools all have the value that they add, and they add value in different ways. For example, Jedox has models, and they fall into this category, which is essentially an analytic application called Enterprise Performance Management. A tool like Click, they fall into this category of data visualization. A tool like Power BI falls into data visualization, but is also integrated into some of the workflow capabilities within the Microsoft platform. So they all have these different varying viewpoints. So when I look at a tool like Jedox, what are the three things that come to mind? Well, Jedox has a set of predefined models you can take advantage of, and they're very advantageous. The models, however, are all financial in nature. They all stem around having something to measure. Thus, they fit into the enterprise performance management tool because you're measuring performance. They also do something else because you're measuring, you're going to forecast, you're going to budget what you're measuring. They give you the ability to input data into their analytics. That being said, a tool like Jedox is giving you a jump start on understanding your financial analysis. Now go across the table to a visualization tool like Click. What that is doing for you is that's letting you see things through color. Lots of times we'll talk about red, green, yellow. Green is go, red is stop, yellow is warning. Well, that visualization helps you quickly identify when things are not as they should be, that things are out of sync. Well, these visualizations use a wide degree of charts, scatter diagrams, plotter, and different ways of looking at the data to help improve our perception of what we're seeing. Now, what's unique about these tools is they sometimes deal a lot more with not just structured data, but also unstructured data. So they give us a better insight to things relative to what we want. We're not measuring as much as we are visualizing what we're looking for in our solution. And then yet the third type may be tied to the fact that we like using teams and we want to have a workflow product and we want to analyze our workflow. Well, then we need to be looking at tools like Power BI that integrate to teams and provide us those analytics relative to our workflow. So here in that small example, we have 3 different sets of technology, all of which can pretty much do the same thing, but all of which, when used for their specific target area, are exceptional. So I think that's when we're evaluating tools, what we need to consider. As far as a price point goes, all of these tools in a cloud-based environment are pretty similar in pricing. So it's not the price point that we want to look at, it's the functionality.